Hey everybody, today we're going to be talking about the upcoming 1.1 patch for EU5 and all my opinions on it. It is including some things that I am very interested in, and I'm going to be spending this entire video going way too in-depth on. That's because the things they're going to be adding are more content for the German region, as well as a rebalance for Bohemia, Brandenburg, Poland, and Austria. That's going to be the primary focus of this video. But there are some other things that they've talked about going into 1.1 that I will probably cover at the end of this video. These two things are going to be the focus of this. Like many of you, I played a lot of Crusader Kings 3, and in Crusader Kings 3, it always frustrated me a lot that Germany was just basically a giant black hole of content. Most people didn't like to be elected emperor. There was very little flavor or anything, any sort of unique cultural innovations, anything at all. Basically, the entirety of central Germany just didn't exist. Really, all Germany as a whole just didn't exist in Crusader Kings 3. When EU5 came out, I was frustrated because it did add content to Brandenburg, Saxony, Bohemia, Austria, Bavaria. It did add a little bit to Switzerland down here, but the content they added was not nearly as strong as I think it should have been. A lot of these places released way too weak, and frankly, I think once again we ended up with a black hole of content situation where these nations here are fun to play through like once, but then really start lacking any sort of individuality and really start lacking any sort of flavor to them that would separate them. Like, why would I want to play a Hanover run over, for example, a Franconia run? At the end of the day, you really wouldn't, because they kind of play very, very similarly. And with that in mind, then why wouldn't I just want to play a Saxony run, who's the most powerful of the North Germans, other than the fact that Bohemia will kill you? And that brings me into my second thing. Bohemia is so very overpowered. Yes, even overpowered compared to where they were historically, that Austria, Brandenburg, and Bohemia definitely do need to be buffed in order to try to match them, which the developers have said they're talking about over here. So these are things that I will be spending a lot of time talking about, and I will be giving you a lot of my opinions on them. As such, this video is probably best used as a podcast or a listen-along type of video. It will probably be an hour, if not longer. Potentially I could go up to 2 hours, depending on how much I like hearing my own voice. So just be prepared for that. Be prepared for that by, put me on your TV and listen along while you're on your phone, pretending that you have people in the room with you. This is a Christmas video, after all, technically. So you can do that. You can put me on your second monitor, or you can just watch along if you really want to. I would love you if you actually managed to watch this entire video. I would be shocked, but you never know. Or like most people, you could just use me to fall asleep too. But at any rate, make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, and make sure to leave a comment down below. By the way, I have to say that first thing because it does increase viewer retention, and when I increase viewer retention, it means that YouTube likes pushing the video more. So let's first talk about the content of Germany. First off, German nations did a bit more than you would think historically. For example, Hanover did join with Brandenburg. Prussia during the 7 Years' War. Switzerland did actually manage. I do believe they managed to push out the Austrians. They managed to beat the Burgundians. Bavaria also existed. I don't really know what else to do there. But basically, there is some content and there are some stuff that you can actually add into the German region that I think would be a lot cooler. Now, let's start with, of course, Switzerland. Switzerland, oh boy, I'm gonna have to actually go in here to show you guys. Switzerland does start with the Swiss Confederation, but like most of the unique content in this game, it doesn't quite work as expected. I shouldn't maybe say most of the unique content, but let's say like a lot of the unique content. You do see here the Swiss Confederation, and you do see that it does rule over its historical Swiss Confederation land, but unfortunately, the Swiss Confederation is very weak. Not only is the Confederation itself quite frustrating to use, with the membership being, or at the very least, the leadership kind of being, well, a Swiss dice roll where like you can't really control it or anything. It's very hard to unify it. It's very hard to make it powerful. Basically, I'm just trying to say the Swiss Confederation I've never seen amount to anything. Under AI hands, it does nothing, and even under player hands, it basically ends up doing nothing. So far as the Swiss content itself, you would be shocked to learn that the Swiss actually do. Once you combine the German advancements, which I believe are 7, that does mean that the Swiss minus those 7, actually do have 8 unique advancements, which is actually putting them a bit behind Bavaria, Saxony, and Brandenburg, as well as Austria and Bohemia, obviously, but they're much higher than the other people. However, these advancements are firmly okay and not particularly that amazing to begin with. What I'm trying to say, as a whole, Switzerland just dramatically underperforms compared to where it did historically. Now, some of this is, of course, because when we do actually look into the Swiss unique unit, the Reichsschläfer, this unit looks amazing on paper, coming in with negative 10% strength damage taken and 25% reduced morale damage taken. But this unit does have a critical weakness, which is that when we compare it directly to the Landsknecht, that is right there, the Landsknecht has 10% reduced strength damage taken and 10% more strength damage done. So actually, the Swiss unique unit does come up a little bit ahead to the Landsknecht, but not so much that this is some huge Swiss mega unit. On its own, if the Reichsschläfer was to fight something like from Italy or France, I think it would do pretty good. But when we compare it to Landsknecht, it's actually not as good as you would think. In addition, when we look into something like Bohemia in Age 2 with the Wagenburg, and we will get into this later, the Wagenburg is so stupidly overpowered that it doesn't even seem like the Swiss got the best unit. Now, the Swiss do have one unique thing here, which is the Legacy of Morgarten, which gives them 10 infantry power. When you combine powerful unique units with infantry power or cav power for that unit, it can kind of double down and make them ridiculously powerful. So I do think the Reichsschläfer is not even a bad unit and could be quite a good unit, but the Swiss, frankly, can't really do much. Okay. So what really needs to be done with the Swiss then? And this is what my video is going to go into a lot here. Number one, I do believe that the peasant levy size, while decent, levies are so weak right now that reasonably, if we combine all these different OPMs with the oath of Rutli, I mean, let's just look here at Bern. I can just show you this right now. A lot of these are republics, which can't really get that many peasant levies to begin with due to no auxilium et concilium, but due to these extremely low population sizes, we can only see here, Bern can raise 900 levies. So if Bern and all these smaller Swiss powers, let's say over here, Toggenburg only raises 300. Over here, 300 again. Over here, we can see 26. Over here, we can see 300. What I'm trying to say is that this 20% levy size would maybe matter on a giga country like France, but doesn't particularly matter very much on Switzerland, unfortunately. They do get the Eternal Alliance of Forest Cantons, but this one does seem to be a bit, if we go into here once again, I keep going out and in, but if we do go to this one, the Eternal Alliance of Forest Cantons doesn't even seem to, Bern doesn't even get that one, as you can see right here, and because Bern doesn't even get that one of the stronger advancements that could potentially help out Bern doesn't even go to Bern. Now, that is only diplomats and prestige, but being able to save on your diplomatic score is quite powerful. So what I'm trying to say here is with a mere 10 infantry combat and an age 3 infantry, I mean, they're going to be dead by age 3. This just means that Switzerland isn't going to be able to do very much. Even united, even in a giant defensive pact, they're just not going to be able to do very much. I think a lot of people don't even know, in fact, that Switzerland has a unique defensive pact because they just get run over by their larger neighbors. So the developers could do a few different things. They could attach to the Legacy of Morgarten, they could attach a 10 morale so they could maybe stay in the battle a little bit longer, but that would have a little bit of an issue in that you'd end up taking a good more casualties as Switzerland. They could buff the infantry power to 15 or even 20 so that their infantry could stand up a bit more. There are, of course, some balance issues right now in cavalry versus infantry, but let's assume that eventually those do get ironed out. Then that, maybe 20 infantry power would be a bit much for mainland power, although we do see that Sweden up here gets 20 infantry power, so maybe Switzerland could get 20 infantry power. I don't know. I'd like to see a couple more advances for Switzerland, some unique reforms, something like that. They do have this unique guild constitution, but it's not very good. You remove almost all your tax from the burghers, to make them happier, but they're going to be happier because you're not taxing them, all for 2.5 production efficiency. If we compare these to some of the things the major countries get, we can see that they maybe get a little bit more, and the things that they get are, well, significantly more powerful. So when we look over here at Castile with reduction to noble power and tax efficiency and centralization, 10 tax efficiency, by the way, that little old Switzerland over here, just getting a mere 2.5 production efficiency doesn't look very good in comparison. Now, production efficiency is better than tax efficiency, but not better enough that a quarter of the amount will make up for it. The developers do, of course, have an issue where they need to decide, should the tier 1 countries like Castile, France, and England, should they be getting more unique content, and should they be getting stronger unique content than all the other countries? In my opinion, no. That's because when we look around, we can see even on countries like Hesse, even when they maybe have one unique advancement that's good, they often have 2 or even 3 that are duds. And they'll only have 3 to begin with. So even though France might also have some duds, although I don't know what is a dud. I mean, this one's not particularly good. Cost of hiring privateers, it's like, okay, whatever. But then they will back that up with amazing advancements like 20 morale. Back those up with 100% noble levy size. So in Hesse's best advancement, and I'll get into Hesse in a second, is something like 50% noble levy and a little bit of army tradition. Well, France just completely shows that up and obliterates it on top of getting other extraordinarily powerful advancements. What I'm trying to say is that the developers need, in my opinion, to make sure that all the unique content for these tier 2, not even tier 2, like these tier 3, tier 4 countries, they need to make sure that these are heavy hitters, because unlike idea groups where everybody had the same amount of idea groups, later in the game, of course, there were things like mission trees that buffed you. There were events that buffed you. You could get permanent buffs here, there, everywhere. But let's say like in the middle of EU4's lifespan, the developers at least kind of got like a decent balance. Not great, but decent, because everyone got the same amount of national ideas, and they could kind of weigh whether or not a nation was OP or not by weighing how great their national ideas were as a whole. But down here, we can see that there are a lot of countries like Austria. Even though I think Austria is too weak, you can definitely see +1 possible government reform in Archduchy of Austria, meaning this is just a very powerful legitimacy on top of diplomats and prestige. So again, when we compare that to Bern, we compare that to Guild Constitution, which doesn't even give +1 possible reform. Well, you can see obviously the problem that's going to start happening here. So number one, just for the entirety of Germany, I think it's pretty obvious that the developers aren't going to be able to add 20, 30 advancements to each of these countries, or at the very least each of these culture groups, because frankly, I mean, let's be real, these countries did not do that much. Even to call them countries at this time period is a bit of a stretch of reality, right? So what I do think the developers need to do is that if even tier 3 German countries like Switzerland are only going to get 8 unique advancements, they need to make sure that A, they actually get all 8 of those advancements, and B, each of these advancements are like big, heavy hitters. Each one of these is like a big thing that pushes a country noticeably into their unique playstyle. They need to make sure that these countries have a power fantasy. I like that term, power fantasy. I'm not saying let's make them overpowered. Let's not go like the Path of Exile approach, the Total Warhammer approach, and just be like, overpowered is fun, yay! Like late EU4 did that. I'm not saying that, but like, what is Switzerland known for? They're known for infantry. They're known for pikemen. They're known for the Swiss Guard. They're known for mercenaries, right? So like, let's emphasize those things and make them strong. Additionally, Switzerland obviously has some problems right now with mountains. Mountains are catastrophic, which is something that's true for pretty much every nation on mountains right now. The downside of mountains, I think it's worse than it even was in EU4, which is really saying something. That's because mountains stack their penalties with things like woods, and we get a minus 50% development growth on top of an insane plus 50% proximity impact. Now, to explain how bad this proximity impact is to some of you who don't get it, right early on the game, when you don't have many proximity modifiers, 50% is 50%, right? You go from 100% to 150%. And for those of you guys who've heard me say this before, just bear with me. I'm going to have to say it again. But going from, once you get negative 50%, the people with flatlands, they go from 100% proximity cost to 50%. The people with mountains go from 150% to 100%. So mountains don't get better over time, they actually get worse. Because hypothetically, if you were to get 90% proximity cost reduction, then regular powers would have 90% proximity cost reduction through the land, and Switzerland would have 60% proximity cost. So if we look at the extreme up end, we can see that mountains would actually get up to 6 times worse than regular land because of that. So there's definitely a problem with mountains. And it gets even worse than that because mountains give you that local monthly development growth reduction. That stacks with other modifiers, and the development in the game gives you very powerful effects, including the local proximity cost, the local population capacity. These are very big things. So when you have a development cost increase, this means you will get less buildings. Your buildings will be more expensive. You'll take more proximity cost. And as the game goes on, these modifiers will keep getting worse and worse and worse for you in comparison to other people. Then when we combo these with like woods, I mean, you can get to the point where it's practically not even worth using your cabinet to try to develop these lands. Even if you're trying to play tall gameplay, you can just get to the point where it's so insanely expensive, it's just ridiculous. Then we have to talk about the fact that a lot of these countries in the Holy Roman Empire have problems where their markets are terrible. So, for example, we can see right here that, actually Bern starts with, what is this? Let me look here real quick. Bern starts with 55% market access. Now, to be clear, that means they produce 45% less goods in Bern at game start. That is insane. Now, I'm not sure you could historically justify starting this area with its own market, but for gameplay purposes, I feel like you kind of have to, because frankly, I'm not really sure how these areas can compete when they start the game and they're already doing a negative 50% income penalty compared to the larger and better countries who actually start with access or on a market. There's definitely a problem Austria has, but we'll get into that later. So, I guess what I'm saying is the historical setup for Switzerland is terrible because they just cannot, they will not, and they cannot ever get to their historical height. They will instantly be completely annihilated by all their neighbors. They do have things like this monthly prosperity, monthly development, but this comes in at age 3. By the time they're dead, great. They can now get a buff that they really needed in age 1, but realistically, they don't need monthly development. What they need is an age 1 new advancement, or maybe they need this push to age 1, but they need one that reduces the development penalty of mountains and reduces the proximity cost of mountains. I think that could really be useful for Austria, which we'll get into later, and Switzerland at game start, is to get a unique advancement, call it Mountain Born. I don't know. I'm just making things up in my head right now. Call it Mountain Born, and you get a 10% reduced proximity cost of mountains and a, let's say, 20% reduced development penalty of mountains. And I think that would really help out nations like this. And I really think the developers should consider things like Legacy of Morgotten should be 20 infantry combat, not 10, because these nations get less content, so it needs to be more powerful to really help them out. I mean, we do have some neat things over here like Alpine defensiveness. I think advancements like these are good for nations like Switzerland. They're very powerful. Now, this one comes in age 4, so it comes in a bit later, but 25 fort defense and tactics, that's quite a powerful advancement. But then again, you can see it's backed up things like invite artist cost and towns and city migration attraction. Now, I'm not saying these are bad, but these aren't migration speed. These are migration attraction, which is, okay. Over here, we can see mercenary size, which is good, and mercenary maintenance, which you almost might notice because the ideal way to use mercenaries is to hire them and then instantly run them into battle so they die and you have to, you don't pay their maintenance. Anyway, let's get off Switzerland for a second. Okay. As we start moving in here to Burgundy, Burgundy, of course, does have some pretty unique stuff, pretty powerful stuff. I think Burgundy is a good example of Burgundy is a good example of how powerful a nation should be, that even if they have a few advancements, they still feel good, because they have army morale 10, which isn't amazing, but then in age 2, we get discipline, and we get cav power, and we get cav maintenance. So these are all pretty good things. Taken as one, they wouldn't be too great, but then we can see urban building cost, agenda impact for burghers, manpower. Like, none of these are bad at all. We have raw materials output 20%. It's like all of these are actually quite good. I think the only one bad is maybe promote the Etats Generaux. This one is actually pretty good, ironically. Cultural influence, 25% is a pretty big modifier. This could actually help you a lot. It's not like, oh my god, this is amazing, but it's not bad. The diplomatic capacity is, you never really run into that, but it's fine to start with. So I think Burgundy is a good example of a nation that like has a few advancements, but they feel certainly quite powerful. And Burgundy starts with 500,000, whereas the strongest Swiss nation starts at 37,000. So I think Switzerland needs a bit more. But as we move up here to, for example, Württemberg, we can see that Württemberg starts at 5 morale and possible burghers in towns and cities. Not terribly good. Then they only get one more advancement in age 4, and it is a pretty good advancement with bank interest and expected cost of court 2%. But this comes in at age 4, so for the majority of the game and before, basically people might even quit before they reach age 4 and get to frugal finances. So for the majority of the game, Württemberg might only sit here at 5% morale, which isn't too great. Now, I can't really speak for Central Germany here because frankly, I don't think they really did very much historically. So I can't try to hype up their big accomplishments. Whereas with Switzerland, I can hype up that they beat the Austrians, I believe. They beat the Burgundians. The Swiss mercenaries were like one of the dominant forces for their time. So not even the Swiss mercenaries, but just the Swiss army, right? They were just, for some reason, managing to beat everybody. So the Swiss should definitely have strong advancements. I can't really speak to down here, but what I can say is that this area of Germany doesn't really do much. It's not very interesting. It is just boring. Lorraine here, you've probably seen under French control so long that you didn't even notice that they don't even start under French control. They do get 5 advancements, which is not a bad deal. We do get iron copper output, which is okay, but a bit too early in the game. Culture capacity, which is okay. We get some monthly religious influence, on to the true faith, a bit too low to matter. Diplomatic capacity, and then we go into fort defense 20%. So even though Lorraine has 5 advancements, none of these are particularly hard hitters, and none of these are particularly strong to begin with. So I'm not really sure what I can say about Lorraine. This is technically, I do believe, is Lorraine actually French culture instead of German? It is actually, yes, it's actually a French culture. So maybe this shouldn't even count as German region, but I think this is probably like a German region area at the very least. Lorraine just doesn't do anything. And by the way, when we're talking about formables, I do want to mention here real quick, going back into Württemberg, for example, or I suppose I could go into Bern here. A lot of these formables, in fact, all of these formables have nothing. They have no content. They have nothing. So, for example, if I'm going to form Switzerland here, which I have to do with the Swiss Confederation, I get duchy, no advancements, and autonomous Swiss cantons, which is probably not something I would actually leave on my country. It's a major reform that gives you parliament-based support, some diplomatic reputation, and stability decay. This is not very powerful. It does not give you +1 reform. It randomly decentralizes you, and it is definitely not the big boon for forming Switzerland that you would hope for. It's not a big boon for anything. Frankly, I think if this was not a major reform, and I think you can't remove this, but I would remove this nearly instantly because even the generic reforms would be better than this one. But this pretty much follows suit for all the different formables in Germany. If I look into Württemberg, for example, I just look into that real quick. You can see that once again, forming a country, Swabia over here gives me no advancements, which is pretty boring. If I was to swap over here, does Luxembourg have a formable? They don't have a formable. I think Hesse has a formable. They don't apparently have a formable either. We can form, I know we can form Hanover, and Hanover has no advancements either, which we'll definitely get into later. We can see up here in Lubeck, I don't think they have a formable either. No, they do have Holstein. Holstein gives nothing either. So it's a lack of formables in combination. I mean, even if I look down here, let's go to like Dauphine, right? And I can see that forming Burgundy gives me nothing. So if I form the old kingdom of Burgundy, I get nothing. So we do have the Dutch over here, and boy, the Dutch are weak. Oh my god, the Dutch are so weak. I'll get into them in a second. But basically, these formables give nothing, and those should definitely be giving stuff. I think the formables should give you at least like 3-4 advancements, at least like 1 or 2 big power hitters, potentially some events, potentially like a good reform off them. You know, just something to make these nations fun, worth playing. Yeah, because I mean, you got to remember, these nations are going to be competing against some power hitters. Even with the AI aggression nerfed, the AI does come at you, and it's not fun to play generic nations with no advancements when you're fighting against Giga Bohemia of Doom or French Elan. You can beat them right now due to regulars, but should they ever actually fix the AI to build enough regulars to oppose the player and stop spamming levies, or if the developers did buff up levies, you can imagine that people would want these countries to feel a little bit, you know, stronger and worth picking, and particularly for multiplayer. And to be clear, there is a belief for multiplayer, at the very least, there's a belief from the single player people that multiplayer people only come in to ruin their fun. 90% of the balance issues multiplayer people have with the game is actually just balance issues that affects everybody and would actually be good if they were fixed. The remaining ones that people don't like are things like maybe Brandenburg shouldn't have space marines and crush everybody. And yes, I mean, you'll see the EU4 subreddit is just like half of the posts are just, look at my space marine discipline. I crushed the AI. Sure. Great. Cool. I mean, it's stupid. And frankly, yes, I would actually nerf it. But the majority of things people take issue with in multiplayer is the absurd balance difference between nations. Because, you know, often it's not the Prussian Space Marines, it's things like Poland forming Prussia for Space Marines, or Austria conquering down and then forming Prussia for Space Marines. That's often the issue, right? So the mere fact that you can get Prussian Space Marines by just clicking a button is stupid, and I will defend that to the end of my life. But a lot of the balance issues are things like, hey guys, maybe Bohemia shouldn't be stronger than all their neighbors combined. Hey guys, maybe Brandenburg shouldn't be completely unplayable trash. So when I talk about things from a multiplayer perspective, a lot of time people just want to play multiplayer. They do care about history, they do care about cool things, and they do just want nations to feel cool and fun. And yeah, I mean, I think the Paradox community as a whole definitely has given a bad they've gotten this like bad reputation to multiplayer, and it's just totally stupid. Multiplayer people want the game to be better just as you do. They just don't want, again, for Austria to be able to form Prussia and at the click of a button, suddenly, ta-da, now they have the best army in the game. Totally unearned for no reason whatsoever other than they click the form Prussia button. Okay. Anyway, let's move on. I think definitely for multiplayer that a lot of these nations could be cooler, could be more fun, could be more interesting. So moving up from Switzerland, we don't really see anything cool or interesting. Now, I have played Hesse. I do like Hesse. I think it's weird, in my opinion, from like an American perspective. Hesse seems more important to Americans than it even does to Germans, because in all our Civil War books, we always talk about the Hessian mercenaries. And, you know, in my mind, I was always like, ooh, what are the Hessian mercenaries? Ooh, what are these guys? Ooh. And then like nobody else in the world seems to care ever. So maybe it's like an American thing, but I always like Hesse being the infantry country. I like them being the mercenary country. I thought that their EU4 balance was actually kind of cool for that. There definitely needs to be a formable for them, something they can shoot for, to aim for, to get more powerful off of. Formables are cool, they're fun, and they're definitely a way to gate your power. So, for example, because you can only do a tier 1, 2, 3, and 4 formable, and because a lot of countries will already start at tier 2, I think Austria starts tier 2, so they can't form Bavaria. But if you make tier 2 formables all around Germany, you can't combine them because you can only do a tier 2 formable once. So if you have these cool tier 2 formables, have you guys ever played Anbenar? And you know, when you play an Escanar, whatever it's called, you've got like the choice of which nation you want to form. That's kind of how I think Germany should be, where it's like, you know, if you form Franconia or whatever they want to call it, right? Then you get like cool infantry or whatever. And if you form Switzerland, you get cool mercenaries and mountain control. If you form Giga then you get, I don't know, the Hansa. We'll talk about the Hansa in a second. I have some opinions on the Hansa, right? Anyway, Hesse's advancements are pretty weak as well. They have trade capacity and monthly diplomats, which is okay. They have Knights of the Empire, which is noble levy size, and monthly army tradition, which is okay. The problem with France's 100% noble levy size is they typically already have like 2,000-3,000 noble levies. Bringing that to 6,000 is like a huge deal. Hesse going from like 100 to 150 is not even noticeable. Hesse does get the monthly army tradition on theirs, but then France has like lots of other really heavy hitting advancements. So Hesse having the one that is sort of okay is not very good. So we have an age 2 advancement, which is and then we have an age 2 advancement, which is, yeah, it's decent. And then it goes all the way to age 4. And then at age 4, they get wine output. Who has ever been in a wine shortage in their entire life? We get wine output and glass output. 2 trade goods that are so worthless, I think people might actually just not take this invention at all. Which does take me into some of these German things. Germany does have some unique advancements and some things they can do. The Fortress Church, which is shared with most of Western Europe. The Seeger process. Now, this is age 2. It gives you silver and lead output. This doesn't affect most of Germany. It helps Austria, it helps Tyrol, it helps Bohemia, definitely helps Bohemia, and that's about it, I think. So it's not really that important. The Landsknecht at age 3 is massive, and actually, if infantry were good, would be pretty good, and then that's it. After that, we have joint ruling, which is not very good at all, frankly. And yeah, it's basically a punishment for having the partition type of government. We have the right to inherit. Now, this one is not too bad because it does set you, it unwritten here, but it does force you onto a bad inheritance style that will potentially lead to joint ruling unless you take a debuff. But the stability investment cost going down by 20% is quite helpful. The aristocracy push is okay. There is one last one that I do believe the Germans can get that's not being listed there. Unless I'm crazy. Isn't it like the Magdeburg rights? I do believe it's like, oh, damn it, you don't have it. Okay, so let's go here. Yes, right here, Magdeburg rights. Now, Magdeburg rights is frustrating to me. We do get 5% loyalty for 40% power for 10% trade capacity. But then right here, the generic one is 5% loyalty for only 25 power for 10 trade capacity and capital economy push, which is odd to me. Now, number one, there are some problems with the whole system as it's set up right now. See, because traditional economy gives you population capacity, this does actually mean that you get pop growth. So you don't actually want too much capital economy in the early game. You would want to stay on traditional economy. So maybe it's good that it doesn't give traditional economy, but it does kind of annoy me here that here's some unique German content and it's really not special and it doesn't do anything. It's another privilege which already exists in the game, but worse and without any push to make it interesting. So I don't really like Magdeburg rights here. Right to inherit is quite good because everybody wants to push to aristocracy if they can. It's just that good. Stability investment cost minus 20% is also pretty decent and saves you a lot of money over the course of a game. And it does give you that unique inheritance as a downside, partition inheritance. So, you know, it's kind of got an upside, a downside to it. That's pretty cool. But other than that, the Germans don't really get anything. And it is a bit frustrating because I do believe the Bohemians just inherit all the German content anyway. So any content you get to try to like strengthen up Germany just like gets like hoovered up by Bohemia over here. But at any rate, Hesse also doesn't have a whole lot. This brings us to Holland. Holland has some serious problems. I'm going to call them German region content. Not only do they have a very large lack of advancements, they just don't really have that much, but they also have a problem with the Holland start is miserably underpowered. I do know that they spent a lot of their early history in this time period being run by the Burgundians, but that's not obviously going to historically happen, and it does raise the question of why their start is so weak. Most people that try to play the game will try to do some Flanders shenanigans maybe, and it can be a bit screwy and difficult to pull off, but it ends up being way stronger. Now you can obviously say that Flanders was way stronger than Holland at this time period, sure, but why is Holland so weak? One of their only unique things that they even do in the game right now, frankly, is the Hook and Cod Wars. The Hook and Cod Wars is just a straight debuff that just serves to waste your time and debuff you and force you to get constantly bombarded with negative events. There's no power up for winning it. There's no unique advancement. There's no winner of the hook and cod wars or anything like that. You just get punished with a disaster that makes you weaker. So Holland, despite being very popular due to being a strong what used to be a pretty cool choice for a starter nation, but it feels very, very weak. And in fact, when you run the game in single player, the overwhelming vast majority of the time, the Netherlands is actually formed by Brabant. I would actually say that Guelders over here is also a pretty decent choice for forming the Netherlands, because they have warring spirit for infantry power here and proximity cost over here. Whereas Holland's advancements are sailors, which we can't really use until later in the game, and sailors I don't believe become much of an issue. We do get the pretty dang powerful navy morale 20%. Unfortunately, the English and Spanish bonuses to navies just completely blow that out of the water. Then we go all the way already to age 3, where we get trade range, which is never really that big a deal. We get max literacy and platoon fire already into age 4, but you're probably kind of already seeing an issue, aren't you? You're like, wait a minute. Yeah, so the thing is, a lot of those Dutch advancements, I should say those Holland advancements are actually just Dutch advancements. And when you look at it from that perspective, you'll notice that playing Holland is not really that rewarding. So we start with low pops. We don't start with a lot of power. We start much weaker than our neighbors. There's 2 nations that can try to form the Netherlands who can do it better than us. The only real thing that Brabant doesn't have is Brabant doesn't have I mean, tax efficiency is good though. So I would actually argue that, I mean, you're basically trading 20 naval morale for tax efficiency or proximity cost, or just, you know, Flanders is just Flanders is just really good, but they can be a bit of a tricky start. So realistically, I'm just gonna say it. I think Holland needs to have a bit of an ahistorically stronger start. The developers don't really like pushing nations, but frankly, I do think that Holland is a bit too tough. They're a bit too weak, and they could use some help to actually push them be a bit more relevant, for sure. Our next guy is going to be, that's right, everybody's nation, Hansa. Hansa has a problem where they got 15 country bonuses. They also got multiple unique buildings. They got so much content. And at the end of the day, outside of that video from Spiffing Brit, Hansa doesn't really do anything. They sit off the map doing nothing. They can never unify and actually own land, which I think is a mistake. I think the Hansa should 100% eventually be able to unify and own land. And if they can't unify and own land, then they should definitely be able to meat puppet their vassals a bit more. I think that their vassals should be able to give them significantly more manpower, and they should be able to play then like a more normal land nation if they actually continue to stay unified and stay together throughout the ages. The Hansa do actually have some unique buildings and stuff that I do want to talk about, because some people don't realize how strong they can be. These unique buildings are actually fairly interesting. They're just not going to show my foreign buildings. Okay. I mean, the Hanseatic Cantor is a foreign, but that's very weird to me. So we do have 3 different things we can do here. So we have the Hanseatic Town Hall, which can be built into somebody's capital, I believe. Not really that important. Hanseatic Cantor. This one is decent, I'll admit, but once again, not really that important and not really that strong, to be fair. It only gives you 0.25 trade capacity. It does give you some trade advantage and maritime presence, and that can be decent. But at the end of the day, this building is kind of weak. It doesn't really, it never upgrades to a tier 2 or tier 3 variant. So unlike the regular trade buildings, it will reach a point where you just don't even want them anymore. You just want to build the regular trade buildings. But that brings us to the Hanseatic Shipping Guild. The Hanseatic Shipping Guild is good, like really good, like really, really good, because it gives 0.10 harbor capacity. This is actually quite interesting, because the Hanseatic Shipwright Guild can be built in other countries to make their natural harbors even stronger. Then in age 2, yes, age 2 here, you can actually get those to a +2. So you can build 2 Hanseatic shipwright guilds. Now, I hope that this works, and I hope it hasn't been broken in recent patches, but if it does work, that means you can give 0.2 natural harbor capacity to any nation that gives you the rights to build in them. This means that not only do the Hansa power themselves up by being able to build navies out of your land and use your people to do it, but it means that the people that they're kind of symbioting inside get significantly more powerful as well through having way better natural harbors. That's actually a cool and interesting gameplay loop for the Hansa. It does allow them then to build their navy and buff people. So you would actually want the Hansa to build these in you. Unfortunately, their other building, the regular building, the Hanseatic contour, is quite weak, and it's not really good at all. I do think that what the developers should do is they should definitely play up the Hanseatic Shipwright Guild, or whatever it's called. I think that that's their cool one. I think that that's the one that they should do, and they should be playing this up significantly more. So we can see we got the one here, we got the one here, I got the one here. I do believe, yeah, it has to be a subject to you. But I think this is kind of the building that they should go for. This kind of gameplay style is what they should go for. So basically, if we look at like the Hanseatic contour over here, I do believe when they build this in other nations, it should maybe give a buff to that nation. It should definitely have a tier 2 upgrade, a tier 3 upgrade to keep pace with other marketplaces. They have a lot of them at game start, and that's probably why they don't want it to be too strong, because otherwise the Hansa will be very, very overpowered. But I definitely think they should go with this sort of gameplay more. And because we're kind of going into fantasy, we're going into the fantasy future, I do believe the Hansa should get like a Hanseatic barracks, and then they can put that down in their vassals, or maybe they could even put that down into other countries, and maybe that gives it like a little bit of development increase. But in return, you generate manpower for the Hansa, who can then use your manpower to fight for them. Kind of like these, I believe there's one in Paris. These, yeah, here we go, the commanderies, because the commanderies generate manpower to the owner, give gold to the owner, but use your dudes to do it. And I think that would be an interesting place to go with the Hansa. But right now, frankly, I just don't think the Hansa, they're just not very interesting. They're powerful, but the off map for them hasn't worked very well. I do think the building based country system is definitely due for a rework. It's probably pushed off for a bit because there's a lot of work to be done here, but I really think that the Hansa should be able to reform themselves into a land owning association, or alternatively, they should be able to exert way more control over their vassals and kind of like power them up more often with things like the Hanseatic Shipwright Guild. I mean, that's, in my opinion, that's one of it kind of turns them into this symbiote that it's like, I'm gonna giga power this vassal and it's also gonna buff me up. And I think, just do more of that. I know I'm kind of ranting here, but Hanseatic Shipwright Guild, I think this is definitely the right way to go about it. I think that Hanseatic Contour, maybe if it's in your vassal, should buff it up. I think you should do things like Hanseatic Barracks that will give, maybe you can only put Hanseatic Barracks in your vassals, but then it'll do things like maybe it gives prosperity or development growth, or, something to kind of buff them up and give them a bit of like manpower. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just saying, like, go a bit historical with it, because like the Hansa did die off, right? Like they didn't exist until the 1700s. They did on paper, but not in reality. So you can kind of make up what would the Hansa look like had they continued. Now, if the Hansa did continue, I definitely think that they were a rival to Denmark. They did kind of, compete with Denmark for trade and all that. And I think that if they continued to stay together and they actually did, unify a bit more, we would definitely end up with more of kind of like, maybe not quite a Portugal type situation, but more of a situation. I think they would exert more control, and I think that's really what North Germany needs, I guess, is what I'm trying to say here. And even if you can argue, well, they wouldn't do that, okay, fine, then just do it because it would be good gameplay. It would be nice to have an actual German power in one of these games that could hypothetically get together and exist here and do things. That's just my opinion, because we're talking about the black hole of content for Germany, and definitely we have a nation here that already has a lot of unique advancements, even though man, the Hanseatic merchant reform is... Ugh. It doesn't even give +1 reform. I think they should maybe give +1 reform, so it's at least free. You get my drift here? But yeah, I mean, it's got all this unique content, although it does kind of dry up eventually. You can see that their unique buildings stop. They get Hanseatic Shipwright Guild max level at 2, and then they can't build that third one. Or they can't go to a third one, and then in age 3 we don't get anything unique. Age 4 we don't get, so their content dries up, and at this point all they do is get buffs, and buffs are good, and some of these buffs can be quite good, right? But what I'm trying to say here is their content does dry up at age 2, and I think the devs could push higher tier versions of their buildings in age 3+. They could push new buildings in age 3+. This does probably seem like a lot of development work, but at the end of the day, it's just buildings, right? You know, some of these are just going to be thumbnails or tooltips. Why did I say thumbnails? Tooltips and buildings, and it won't really be as hard as maybe you think it is. I'm rambling a bit much on the Hansa, but that's because I was interested in what the Hansa were going to be, and it's like they kind of got half implemented, half not implemented. The devs got halfway into pushing Hansa, and then it feels like they kind of stopped because, I don't know, maybe it just wasn't working out right, and they just, yeah. So that brings us to the next thing. We talk about Germany, and that's what I think. I think for Germany, we should focus on Switzerland, fleshing out the Swiss. So there's an actual content over here. I think right here, there's not much we can do, but, you know, do something with this area. That would be pretty nice. I definitely think Hesse is like ripe for content. Holland just needs to be flat buffed, and they need to have more advancements, and they need to be stronger. And the cog wars need to not be just terrible for them, right? We could also go for Frisia with that Frisian freedom thing. I mean, that could definitely be something we push a bit more, but you know, I'm not really that excited about them. Hansa need more. Hanover. Oh, I forgot about Hanover. So Hanover is actually a nation that really doesn't have anything in game, despite the fact that historically they were a bit relevant. As we can see here, Lüneburg is owned by the Welfs, and Brunswick is also run by the Welfs. And over here, Hildesheim is owned by, oh, you never believe this, the Welfs. Now, Hanover is remarkable for during the 7 Years' War. They were under Britain, but they were still a German duchy, and they fought on the side of Prussia. Hanover is notable for having managed to defend themselves against the French and managed to maintain their independence throughout the war. Now, granted, we're talking about the 1700s, but what I mean here is that there is some, unlike, for example, Württemberg, which, okay, they existed, right? Like, what else can we say? They existed. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but Hanover does actually have some things that they did throughout history. We do have some content with the Welfs trying to unite their land and marrying and trying to keep it all together. We do have some content. We do have some things they did historically with when they eventually did form Hanover, get inherited by Britain, and they did manage to fight in wars, and they weren't conquered, and they did perform at the very least decently. So I do think there's something the developers could go with that. And if not the Hansa, then I definitely think Hanover should be kind of like a North German content nation. Because again, you know, Brandenburg's great and cool, but I think Brandenburg will always be locked down by early game weaknesses, and Brandenburg's probably more going to push north, which isn't to say we couldn't do something with Pomerania. There is something we could probably do with Pomerania, just I don't think it's that important at game start. Or maybe we should say EU5 start. Like, you know, for the first couple of content waves, I think we should focus on like the big black holes of content. And Pomerania is likely going to be usurped into Brandenburg, so it's not really that big a deal. But Hanover is definitely a nation that could provide us with some gameplay. Some people do like Hanover. There's one dude who plays my chat, and he talks about his love of Hanover. So maybe the devs could just add more content for Hanover. You know, they got the one thing. They got Baltic sailors, right? So maybe you could add like 5, 6, 7 more advancements or something for Pomerania. I don't know. But yeah, my focus is kind of on like fleshing out the black holes here. And I think there's a black hole in Switzerland because they always die and are way too weak. I think there's a black hole over here in southern Germany because, well, they don't really have anything they can do. I think there's a black hole in central Germany with, you know, Hesse could easily perform some stuff in there. In western Germany, I think Holland is just too weak. And I think the Netherlands just always dies. In North Germany, we definitely got choices. We could do Hansa, we could push Hansa, we could push Hanover. These two could be things right there, right? And then that leaves us with Brandenburg, which brings us into the Brandenburg, Poland, Austria balance situation. Now, I have talked about this, and I have brought this up a lot over the past couple of months. Bohemia is catastrophically, horribly, massively, irrefutably broken. Now, I'm going to do a few things, and I'm going to run it a month, just so you can see the differences here. Every nation right at game start should get common militias that doesn't have it. Every nation should get auxilium and concilium that doesn't have it. So I'm just making sure they have all of those right at game start so we can get a fair comparison. And then let's just run this a month so you can see just how, wait a minute. Moravia. There we go. I'm just going to run it for a month, and then we're going to wait for the month tick so you can see their vassals, or sorry, not see their vassals, see their levies here real quick. So we can see Moravia alone has 12,000 vassals once we get common militias on them, right? Austria, even after they're buffed to proximity from downstream rivers, now giving the same as upstream, Austria has a 21,000. So Austria is now much stronger than Moravia. You know, congratulations, they're stronger than the Bohemian vassal, but Bohemia themselves has 29,000. Poland, even with every buff we can give them, has a mere 13,000. So Poland is about equal to the Bohemian vassal, and Austria is significantly weaker than Bohemia alone. This is not to mention their Silesian counts here, who can be raising up 700, 700, 700, 700, 700, 700 troops and deathballing these. In other words, Poland would irrefutably get smashed by Moravia and the Silesian vassals at the same time of Austria. While Hungary, Austria can now likely beat Bohemia, Austria and Poland are just catastrophically weak. This is to say nothing of Brandenburg, who is just laughably underpowered to the point of insanity. Now, what does make Austria so weak? Well, as we have mentioned, number one, Austria can't use their mountains. Now, I did talk about this earlier with the whole Swiss thing, but Austria is not Austria-Styria. Austria is just Austria. All they can do and all they can use is Austria itself. Styria, the rest of their country, this half of their country, does nothing. It gets even worse because the old Hohenzollern lands over here. Hohenzollern? Habsburg. I don't know why I said that. The old Habsburg lands over here are completely and totally useless. In fact, most players will actually shove these into a vassal at game start just so they can get something out of them and so they don't take war exhaustion for them being occupied. So focusing on Austria here for a second, let's focus on this. Now, Austria does have two pretty powerful, unique reforms. The number one is the Archduchy Austria, and the number two is whatever that second one was called. It doesn't show up here, but it's basically another free legitimacy plus possible government reforms. The reason I rate legitimacy so high is the more legitimacy you make, the less you pay for your cost to crown once you reach 100. And cost to crown costs start going up considerably. If you were to make, hypothetically, 1.0 legitimacy per month, you would pay absolutely nothing for your cost to crown. This is why China is overpowered. They can do that. But it does mean that Austria getting 0.1 from their Archduchy and 0.1 from their other thing that's not showing up here. This means that Austria does get 0.2 legitimacy, which puts them pretty high. That's actually not a bad bonus. But Austria does have the problem here where I do consider Austria to be a tier 1 nation. They are supposed to be up here with France, England, Castile. They are supposed to be a very powerful nation. If we look at their unique country events compared to any of the countries around them, they are more in line with like these tier 1 countries than they are in line with like these tier 2 countries. Do you see that? Like 30 Naples, 31 Aragon. I mean, they're not quite up here. Like they're what, 145, so this is 178, 205, 233. Muscovy's 100, and then I think another 50 or 80 when they form Russia. So Austria's up there, but they're not like up there, right? But they are supposed to be more of a tier 1 nation, but they're definitely not packing the power of a tier 1 nation. Despite showing that they have 1.5 million pops right at game start, they actually have more like a good, solid 600, 700,000, I would say. I say that's a good number. They get to call a decent amount of levies out of them due to common militias and auxilium and concilium, because for those of you who don't know, those give you a flat amount. So if you raised 0% levies from a location, common militias would raise that to 20%, peasants, then auxilium would raise that to 30%, so you'd actually still get a decent amount. So like Austria can still raise a kind of chunk of levies right now, with the buffs to the rivers as well. 21,000 is nothing to scoff at, but it's nothing compared to Bohemia. Now, of course, they're not supposed to be as strong as Bohemia at game start, but this does raise into the issue where every single game, I'm sure you've seen this exact thing in patch 1.0.10, where Bohemia and Hungary just kill Austria every single time. That's because they're just frankly too weak. Austria needs to be a little bit more powerful, obviously, because they are in a historically very precarious position, and Hungary and Bohemia will not spend the entire game fighting each other. They will instead both go, wait, what if we didn't fight each other as we did historically, and we just look the other way and conquer everybody around us? And they go, yeah, what a great idea. And they both ignore each other, and they just go the other way, which means that Austria sits here and just gets devoured. So Austria does need more control in the south. And in fact, I would argue they need control over here in the west. I do not think nations should be so inclined to give up their historical starting lands. There's some times where there's not much you can do about it. Like Castile obviously can't control their entire country, so giving some of it up will generally be their play. Hungary can't reasonably get control over Transylvania until age 3, so they're probably going to put that into a vassal, right? But Austria has problems here where they did historically control this land. This wasn't really like uncontrollable land, and Austria and Styria were actually controlled by them. It gets worse because they have a dynamic historical event where they move their capital to Graz. Moving your capital to Graz is a horrible, horrible nerf that just makes you significantly weaker for absolutely no reason. There's no advantage to moving your capital to Graz. There's no reason to do it. It doesn't benefit you at all, in fact. So what are my suggestions then to buff Austria? What would I say we should actually start doing here? So number one, and I think that this one is, just kind of obvious. I think that their age 2 advancement, a land of mountains and rivers, I do believe this should come down to age 1. And I believe this should be buffed to 10%. Or alternatively, it should come down to age 1 and it should be changed to 5% proximity cost. And then it should get something like, kind of I was talking about like the Mountain Born. It should be like 5% proximity cost and then 10% proximity cost on mountains and then 20% development on mountains, because mountains give 50%, so 50 minus that 20 would be 30% penalty. So at the very least they could try to work with mountains, right? Or maybe it should just be mountain born and you just get 10% proximity on hills. It says a land of forests and rivers, but have you actually looked at this? Look at the topography. So the second you get out of the Austrian north, you're screwed. You just cannot get through those mountains on proximity. And then it gets worse because the vegetation is forest, but the land of forest and river does nothing to help with the fact that forest is giving you 25 dev penalty, 25 proximity penalty, then mountain is giving you a 50 dev penalty, 50 proximity penalty. That's negative 75% development, negative 75% proximity. There is no way the land of mountains and rivers and forests is getting through these mountains and forests. The rivers, though, they work just fine. The rivers are great. That's why the best play for Austria is to take over Bavaria and then play as Bavaria. And you end up just kind of forming this cube where you take Salzburg and you take Tyrol and you take Bavaria and Upper Bavaria and you form the cube. Now, there are some problems, of course, because the the dynamic historical event to take Tyrol is very RNG. Sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. Did you do something wrong? No, it's just that hard to get it. And in addition to that, Austria does have a unique law that if you get it too late, ends up not exactly being that amazing, called house rules. You won't see it on the list anywhere, of course, but house rules only is given to you if you have a king, duke, and you have an unmarried brother. Then it procs the event to get the house rules law. which is very confusingly specific, often doesn't happen, and has the other problem where what most people actually do here is they go with the favor the ruler. Instead of traditional distribution, we sprint to favor the ruler. I do believe House Rules is in here. It's somewhere. I haven't gotten it in so long because every single time I play this nation, my brother actually dies or something happens to the dude, and I end up not actually having a ruler and an unmarried brother. It's weird, but it's also weird that it's so weirdly specific to get house rules. Like, I understand that the historical flavoring needs to kind of proc to make it work, but also if there's a buff intended for a nation, it's a bit weird. Like, if it has a chance to just not proc due to bad luck, due to bad RNG, right? Like, it shouldn't be that just bad luck and bad RNG means you don't get your buff. Now, going with that 5% proximity cost, let me tell you, Bohemia gets 10 proximity cost. Although I don't think we actually see it here. They do get a law with 10 proximity cost, which is insane. Frankly, the fact that Austria, who desperately needs the proximity cost to do anything, gets 5, and Bohemia, who even at game start is a land of assuming direct control, gets 10. Bohemia very frequently has so much control over their land that they can conquer down to the mountains and control them better than Austria can. Certainly Hungary can. See, Hungary, because they don't actually get blocked by these mountains, but actually can just control into them, Hungary can get better control over the Austrian silver mines than Austria can. That's because these are on a hill. Here's a hill, there's a hill, and there's a hill. Austria actually does not control their silver mines right here better than Hungary. Hungary can literally control them better, which is absurd to me. That's insane. That's ridiculous. Actually, just nutty when you think about it. Okay, so Austria. What do we need for Austria? Number one. I do like Austria's content right now, although it's not future-proof. For now, it's fine. We do have 10 morale, which isn't amazing, but it's fine. We do have Landsknecht tactics in age 3, which isn't great, but it's fine. 10 morale, 0.10 military tactics. Then as we go into age 5, we get 3 discipline. Is this France? No. Is it much weaker than France? Yes. Will you be crushed by France? Irrefutably. Will you be massacred by Hungary? Yes. Which does raise the question, how do the developers think that Austria managed to fight all these powers and not be completely annihilated? Because in every game they give Austria, like, they give it enough army to kind of not be a joke, but they don't give them enough army to ever actually, like, compete with these countries. Like, Hungary will trash them, France will trash them, the Ottomans will completely annihilate them. And it's not like a numbers issue, it's just like man to man, the Austrians will get annihilated. And I just don't think that that's, like, that should be more represented through the game and not just through, let's give them bad military bonuses because it's funny. Like, if they only have 2 age 1 advancements and one of them is just French Elan but half as good, then that kind of sucks because both of them take 1 advance. I mean, we can see France gets 2 advances in age 1. One of them is 100% noble levy size, which doesn't scale amazingly, but definitely wins them the 100 Years' War, right? Austria gets army morale, and the prestige in diplomats is okay, I'll admit, but it's not really that amazing. Then in age 2, they get the proximity cost, which is just weaker than Bohemia's. And then they get diplomatic reputation, which doesn't, frankly, do a lot. What I'm trying to say here is basically Austria does a lot of different things. They kind of play the diplomacy game. The legitimacy kind of helps them play the money game. The proximity gives them a little bit of proximity, but everything they do is just something a tier 1 power does, but worse. Castile gets 10 proximity. Bohemia gets 10 proximity. Ottomans get 20. Muscovy over here gets 20. Like, anything they do, another nation does better. It does kind of make them the Swiss Army knife of nations, but I think what they would need to do then is, if they're going to be the Swiss Army knife, if they're going to do everything decently, then they need to combine these advancements and let them actually do everything decently. If they're only going to get 5 proximity instead of the 10 that other tier 1 powers get on their laws, then it should be 5 proximity cost and something else. If they're only going to get 10 morale instead of the 20 or 15 morale that France and Spain gets, then it should be 10 and something else. This is definitely not your EU4 Austria that can just click buttons and suddenly they've PU'd Bohemia, Hungary, Poland, and half the known universe. This is EU5 Austria that has to actually fight their way to the top, that has to actually, gain land to get to the top. A lot of people do forget that Austria did fight wars and they did win them. Shocking, I know. A lot of people seem to think that when they lost to Prussia, that this was like a crushing defeat and that their entire country was massacred, and not that they lost some of Silesia. I mean, when you put it in that perspective, you start to think about it, right? Like, oh no, we lost some of Silesia. Not even all of Silesia, which is funny when you think about it, right? But yeah, the Austrians were historically very successful, and I do just frankly think that they need more of a push. People will say, well, their personal union with Bohemia, blah, 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 blah. Right, but the thing is, how do you think Austria got Austria? How do you think the Habsburgs got Austria? They won a war. They took it by force. Did they have Hungarian support? Of course they did. But that's why I think they should be the Swiss Army knife of nations. They should just kind of do a little bit of everything. They should have an okay army. They should have a pretty decent economy. They should have good diplomacy. They should just kind of do everything, because that's what the Austrians did. That's what the Habsburgs did historically, right? Okay. That moves us to Brandenburg, and we're talking about Brandenburg, Poland, and Austria right now. If we look at Brandenburg, let's actually look at this piece of shit. So it's pretty clear that Brandenburg will almost instantly get reamed with the... can I get the event to Brock right now? They almost instantly get reamed with the event... Vittelbacher neglect. So they instantly get slammed with a -40 legitimacy. Now, you will instantly have to move your cost to court all the way to full to try to get your legitimacy back, so you can even get your crown power back. Playing with low legitimacy is just throwing away money, so you'll have to sit here at full cost to court for quite some time to get it back up. This doesn't help you at all. Then you get the Vittelbacher neglect, giving you monthly legitimacy reduction, monthly control reduction, and max control -10. You start the game, you are right at game start, you're only 29% of your correct culture. You don't even accept Palabian. So of your entire country, only 29% of it is accepted. You're not a very big nation to begin with. Then you instantly get debuffed by this event. Then you have to take multiple debuffs by this event to get it to work. Then, and I kid you not, the dynamic historical event required to get you the von Hohenzollern, you need to have the Holy Roman Empire put their cousin on your throne. Then you need to be PU'd by that nation, and then you get the Hohenzollern, if they're still emperor. So basically, you would need to, effectively, this is how it works. You start the event, you get rid of the Vittelbachers, then Bohemia puts their cousin on your throne. Then you need to hope Bohemia stays as emperor, because if they don't, you get screwed. Then you need Bohemia to be elected emperor, and not you, even though you, the player, will often win the vote instead of Bohemia for some reason. And you need to pull this off before the Hussite Wars, where they can't become emperor because now they're Hussite. And if you pull all that off, you get a von Hohenzollern, which doesn't really actually buff your country as much as you hope it does. What I'm trying to say is this dynamic historical event basically have its a 0% chance to fire. I've deliberately tried to go out of my way to fire it, and I still cannot get it to fire. It's not too bad to get rid of the Vittelbachers. This is something that you can do. It's not impossible. You can pull this off, but it's just stupid. What I'm trying to say is it's just stupid. It's too difficult. It's too pointless. It's too stupid. I hate it. It's really dumb. And the fact that you're giving this horrible debuff to a nation that already starts this pained is kind of insane. Now, if you want the Brandenburgers to lose this land over here, then, honestly, just add some event or something to it. You start them with Lusitania, and then they lose that. They don't have to lose it, but, you kind of need the money. Then you have this awkward position where your capital is on shitty Brandenburg, but you don't really want to build it up. You don't want to put these unique buildings on it because it's just going to move to Berlin eventually. And then Berlin isn't even a city. You move your capital to Berlin, it doesn't even make it a city. I think historically you gotta like stretch the reality of some things here, because if we start on Brandenburg and then our capital moves to Berlin, and then that deletes all the capital buildings here that we built, and we can't build much because we're gonna start the game poor as shit. I'm just trying to say this nation sucks. This nation sucks. And by the way, going back to Austria for a second, I do believe Linz needs to start as a city. And I think even Graz can be argued to start as a city. And I think this could be a big push for the country. Because frankly, when we do look at this nation, we do see kind of a problem here. Although we can see that Bohemia kind of doesn't have as many towns maybe as it should. And definitely doesn't have as many cities as it should. Austria is not some rich, super rich nation, and Linz having 54,000 people and not be considered a city is kind of silly. And Graz having 40,000 people and not being considered a city also kind of silly. And again, this is commonly used all around the world. Like, for example, over here, some of these areas were downgraded from cities to towns to try to balance Naples a bit more. Some of these areas up here were downgraded from cities to towns. And I think the developer intent, if you want to look at it from that perspective, is that nations really shouldn't be starting with more than one city. But we do see that doesn't really work out when some nations start with like 5 and some nations get 1 despite having cities around them who should be cities. Now obviously this does work for nations like maybe Hungary, because we start with 1 city, and you know, Pest, despite being the more important area, doesn't start with a city. But yeah, I think at the very least Linz should be a city. Arguably, Graz should be a city as well. That would help Bohemia have a much stronger start in the game. But at the very least, for Brandenburg, it's utterly pathetic. This start, it's so pathetic. We're starting Brandenburg on a swamp, and yes, okay, Brandenburg was shit, and the entirety of this start is terrible, and it's supposed to be terrible. But here's the issue then. So Austria is weak, but at least they're trying, right? Brandenburg is weak, and they have building cost and culture capacity, but they can't even use their culture capacity because they're only 29% primary culture. So maybe this culture capacity should be like a flat amount instead of a percent. Maybe it should be like 10-20%. Maybe it should be culture conversion as well, something like that. Maybe expansive policy should give them culture conversion speed 10%. People will say, but historically, right, but like, you know, I don't care. Oh, but historically, they didn't culture convert these people until X year, but I don't care. Like, I don't care. Like, at some point, you gotta get away from the simulation thing, and you gotta try to be like, okay, but this isn't working. Like, it's not working. Brandenburg isn't working. This nation sucks. Brandenburg in Age 2 gets crown power and higher mercenary premium cost 10%. So we don't really get a lot in Age 2. In Age 3, we get estate satisfaction. Now that one is quite good. And tax efficiency, that one's quite good. But here's the problem. Age 3 Brandenburg is about as good as Age 2 Poland. And Age 2 Poland is already not some amazing, like, powerhouse. And that kind of gets into the problem with this entire situation. Brandenburg is not given army quality because that was a late game thing, but then they're given the ability to build up, but they start horribly weak. Likewise, Poland, which I'll get into in a second, is the same thing. No army quality, but the ability to build up, but they start the game quite weak. Austria starts at the very least with a decent army, but they don't get any big boosts, so they actually end up weaker than basically everyone else, whereas Hungary starts with this crazy 20 cav combat. Austria gets 10 morale, Bohemia gets 10 proximity and like 50 gold mines right off the rip. They get the most broken Age 2 unit in the game. Oh boy. Oh boy. And let's talk then about Bohemia. Why does Bohemia then start so strong? Why is Bohemia destroying everybody? Well, it's pretty obvious. Number one, they have infinite gold mines. Gold mines historically, yes, they were good. But having like all these gold mines and having these silver mines did not mean that, like, I don't know if like anyone knows this, but no, actually Bohemia was not conquering the entire Holy Roman Empire with 50 billion troops. In fact, here's something a lot of people never actually stop to think about. The Hussite Wars was mostly small skirmishes. The largest battle was 80,000 against 40,000. Bohemia having the 40,000. Bohemia did not, in fact, hire 900,000 Gorbelian soldiers. The Hussite Wars did not, in fact, give Bohemia $900 trillion. Right now, the Hussite Wars is just click for free money. And you just click, 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 click. Ooh, event. And then the event gives you more free money. And you go free money, free money, free money, free money, more free money, free money, free money, more free money, free money, free money, more free money. Bohemia gets stronger throughout the Hussite Wars. Not weaker, stronger. Bohemia actually gets so hypercharged by the Hussite Wars that they typically come out of it in unstoppable giga juggernaut. In fact, the Hussite Wars has a complete and total opposite effect on Bohemia that it did historically. Now, this is all ignoring that these gold mines are absolutely just ridiculous. The silver mine having 25% output right at game start is ridiculous. Just as ridiculous as Hungary's plus 25% gold mine, by the way. Like, these nations shouldn't be starting on these many gold mines if they're also going to get buffed this hard. Like, come on, developers. But then when we add on to that Bohemia will instantly then get 10% proximity cost and has one of the best proximity setups. I mean, frankly, I mean, just look at this. They got like a river that's like wee, then another river that's like wee. Then if they get Moravia, they can get proximity over to here. They go down the river to here. Oops, skip one territory, then a river to here, then wee. And then if they can get to Linz, they can take control over Vienna. Like wee, like oh my god, this nation's river setup is insane. Then immediately the AI sprints Saxony because they got the river going wee up here. I mean. This nation, I'm sorry, did not need 10 proximity cost. In addition, the Wagenburg being one of the most broken units in the game, having 10% strength damage done, 10% strength damage reduction, and then they get their defensive bonus doubled from 25 to 50% is kind of insane, right? Yeah, pretty nutty, that one. Now, look, I do understand that the Bohemians fought very well during Age 2, but I do believe that then the Wagenburg should get kind of what Genoa got. Back during the beta, the Genoese crossman was stupidly overpowered. Very, very, very overtuned. It was absurd. You could literally spam Genoese crossbowmen and wipe the entire map. So developers nerfed its infantry, they nerfed it a little bit. They made it do negative 10% strength damage dealt, but in return, they gave it 10% infantry power. So it kind of evened out a little bit, but it meant that the Genoese crossbowman was like a tiny bit weaker right when you got it, but the nation scaled better and Genoa scaled better. Bohemia has the same exact problem. The Wagenburg is ridiculously overtuned right when you get it, but then the nation doesn't scale because, so I'm going to sneeze again. Or not, maybe. Bohemia has the problem. We're right in Age 2, and right with the Hussite Wars, they're an unstoppable giga juggernaut that conquers all their neighbors. Then they snowball out of control. And they don't really scale past that. Basically, what I'm trying to say is the Wagenburg should be nerfed. They should get some bonus to it, tactics or something to try to represent it, maybe. Maybe the Wagenburg gets this defensive bonus nerfed to like 35 instead of 50, but then they get 0.10 tactics on it, so they scale a bit better, right? And we let Bohemia scale a bit better, but then in return, they don't absolutely massacre all their neighbors instantly. In addition, I think that 10 proximity law is absurd. That should be nerfed to 5%. And then we should add that 5% maybe somewhere down here, like maybe in Age 3 or 4, right? Maybe fortified towns gets the 5% proximity added to it. And they can get that proximity back, but later on. That weakens their early game, pushes their power a bit later. So they feel, the same later in the game. They just don't like sprint out of the gate, crush all their neighbors, conquer the Holy Roman Empire, oppose France, and then they can't stop France because France is a bit better. Now, another thing is, you can pretty clearly see is Bohemia does, of course, I don't believe they get it at game start. No, they get it some point in the future. They do get this Bohemian Commonwealth, which does buff them a lot. Culture capacity +3. and then +1 reform, and then a +1 cabinet seat. Like, that's a really good, that's a really good one right there too, right? So they can just like accept every culture and continue to like conquer through the land with this giant Bohemian culture. There's also another problem, and this is something that doesn't really get brought up a lot. A lot of these buffs later in the game will affect entire areas. Austria gets split up into Lower Austria and Upper Austria for some reason. Styria gets split up into Styria, Carinthia, and Cariola. But then Bohemia is just Bohemia. Slovakia is just Slovakia. They do split up this land over here a little bit, but like I definitely feel like there's like why is Austria Lower Austria and Upper Austria, and then there's just all of Lesser Poland, all of Bohemia? Like, you see what I mean? Like, it's a little bit much. I feel it's a little bit much. It's a tiny bit too much land. Okay. Tiny bit too much land right there in that one area. But anyway, okay, so Bohemia just powers out of the gate. Age 2, they win the game. Nobody can catch up to them. Okay, so Brandenburg has the issue where they have these backloaded infantry combat and army morale, but this is infantry power and army morale in age 5 and 6. It's a little bit late to really matter, right? Poland is the same way as Brandenburg. In age 1, we do get proximity cost, which is good, but only 5, not the 10. So they're not a tier 1 nation, but it's like, that's what I was talking about earlier. We do have monthly prosperity, pop migration speed. This is good. I think Brandenburg gets that, right? The proximity, or is that only, hold on, I'm trying to find this. I think it's only Saxony gets that then, right? Or am I crazy? I swear to God this was here, and now you all are gonna think I'm crazy, but I swear there was prosperity. I'm not crazy, chat. Anyway, the prosperity helps your pop growth a little bit. The pop migration speed helps you out a little bit. The proximity cost helps you out a little bit. And they do get a third one here for tolerance of heathens. This one's pretty worthless though, so frankly it's just kind of tacked on. They get a third advancement. So what of course is the problem with Poland? All their advancements after this are just about building up their nation. Diplomatic annexation, parliament-based support, tax efficiency, building cost. Max RGO size is really good, mind you. Like, I don't think it's bad at all. Over here we get the Council of Three Lands, which is something I probably would not take, but could be decent. Polish Renaissance, invite artists, cost, possible number of artists. Probably I'm never going to use that myself. Over here we have wheat production, food production. It's okay. Do you see the problem? We're all the way into age 3. And although we can get a pretty good economy out of Poland, they are a build up the nation, much like Brandenburg. All their military stuff is backloaded. Now Poland is age 4 and 5. Brandenburg is 5 and 6. After age 5, Poland actually falls off a cliff and doesn't get anything, which you could argue is fine. And I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. Like, their age 6 stuff isn't bad. 25 crown power. That one's pretty bad, actually. Why did they get the Schlachta? The Schola. This one's max literacy for nobles 5. This is max literacy for everyone 10. Okay, whatever. The winged hussars do have the problem that here we are, we're Poland, we're right next to Hungary, we get the winged hussars, they do 25% more morale damage, and wait, Hungary just does 20% more cavalry power, huh? It's actually age 4, the winged hussar is just weaker than Hungarian anything. So we got the late winged hussar into age 5. This one does 25 morale damage and 10% strength, so still actually probably weaker than Hungarian units, because Hungary would effectively have 20 strength, 20 morale. This is 10 strength, 25 morale. We do get the initiative though, which is nice, but do you see the problem? Once again we have a nation that, like, they're not coming to snuff. Poland only turns on and really gets good in age 5 militarily. Age 3, they definitely have a very strong economy. Age 2, we have a strong economy. But for a nation that doesn't have a lot of starting population, only 1 million, we are right next to Giga Battleship Bohemia. Giga Battleship Bohemia, despite having 1.8 million, just completely dwarfs Austria's 1.5 million because Austria can't literally control it. So here we have a build-up and scale nation. Here we have a build-up and scale nation. Here we have a play for late game nation, I guess, and not really do that much. It's pretty obvious that Bohemia and Hungary, as we've talked about here, are just so completely dominant in the region that Tweedledee and Tweedledum and Tweedledummer here just can't compete with these three. So yes, I do agree, going back to originally this post, that you do need to nerf Bohemia, strengthen Brandenburg, Poland, and Austria. And also, frankly, I do think that Hungary needs to be taken down a touch. One of the reasons Hungary needs to be taken down a touch, of course, deals with the Ottomans. The Hungarians are so much stronger than the Ottomans that if the Ottomans ever did even make it through the Balkans, they would just have Hungary instantly punch them out, and it wouldn't even be close. So, yeah. That's all I have to say about that. I think I pretty much talked about all the different countries and all their stuff here for now. I mean, how long has this video been? We've been going on for an hour, 24 minutes. I think that's about good. I think that's about all I wanted to say. So, in summation of everything I just said, right? Number one, let's add way more power to Switzerland. Let's add way more power to the Swiss Confederacy. And frankly, let's let the player control it. Let's let the player take over the Confederacy way easier, way harder, and even let them form Switzerland easier and harder. You can say, oh, but it's ahistorical, but without it, the Swiss Confederacy just gets obliterated. They will not perform as well as they did historically, okay? And then if we giga power up the Swiss Confederacy, we can power up Austria. Austria did lose, I believe. They lost to the Confederacy a little bit. I do believe that happened. And, if we power up the Swiss Confederacy a considerable amount, then, Austria might actually hypothetically be able to lose to them. If they lose to them, they would also need to be powered up. Brandenburg is just miserable. Poland is playable. Like, I'd say Poland is playable compared to Brandenburg. Brandenburg is just unplayable trash that will never do anything. I do see Poland do stuff, but most of what Poland does is just kill Brandenburg, take back the Kashubians, and then go from there. Bohemia is just an unstoppable murder machine. Austria cannot stop Hungary. They cannot stop Bohemia. You can say, but historically, right, but historically Austria did manage to actually play the game. They did manage to actually do stuff. And you could say they profited by their neighbor's demise. Sure, they did manage to profit from their neighbor's demise, but that's because their neighbor's demised. Like, in-game, Bohemia and Hungary are just giga unstoppable behemoths of doom. That's not what happened historically. Like, I feel like some people kind of lose track of, like, reality. And I feel like definitely it's like, the right way to say this is I feel like it's like a lot of Prusaboos, like, get so much in a twist, and they're like, no, Austria was weak and pathetic and worthless and powerless, and we were the biggest, strongest people ever. Like, then why did the Austrian Empire even form? Because the Austrian Empire did have to fight the Ottomans, they did have to fight France, they did have to fight Prussia, all of them at the height of their power, and yet they continued to exist as a nation. Why do you think that is? Were they just lucky over and over for 500 years? Did they just trip and fall into it 900 times? Like, surely the Habsburgs must have had some long-term strategy that was working out for them, because you just can't get lucky for 500 years. Anyway, that's my thoughts on all of this. Yeah, buff Holland. Let's work on the Hansa. Definitely all the formables in Germany should have advancements. I'd like to see advancements and at least like one or two good, cool reforms for them. Maybe add like a law, like at least like I would put like a checklist and like reasonable. So don't just like hard force it, but I would put a checklist. Every formable in Germany, and there's a few of them, there should be one formable per region. Each formable should have like one cool reform, one cool power fantasy the nation fulfills. So for example, maybe Franconia is like the knights. Maybe they're like the noble levies, cav powered knights, right? Although Bavaria is also kind of that, but Bavaria is not really that good at it, truth be told. Maybe Saxony should be the giga tall nation. They're already like kind of good at going tall with the monthly development, with the crown power, monthly war exhaustion. Ugh. But like, kind of touch up Saxony. Maybe they should be the gigatall nation. there's some other stuff. I'm just saying, like, every nation should do something that you would want to play them to be cool with, right? And if you did that, I think that would diversify the game a lot more and make playing the game a lot more interesting and a lot more replayable, frankly, and a lot more fun. Because if I wanted to do a run and I just wanted to be the Giga Tall Nation, I could go Saxony. If I wanted to be the Knight Nation, I could go Hesse. And if I wanted to be the Trade Nation, I could go Hansa. You know, just stuff like that, right? Like, I think Switzerland should be like the infantry nation. Like, it's a bit memey, but like, there's not actually that many infantry nations in the game. There's Sweden and yeah, pretty much just Sweden. Anyway, thank you for watching. Merry Christmas, everybody, or happy holidays, whatever you celebrate. This is technically a Christmas movie, so thank you all for watching. Thank you for being here. Thank you, everybody. And as always, I hope all of you have a great rest of your day.